The calendar invite was vague. Touch base 3:15 p.m. Bianca never called one-on-ones unless something was wrong or something was changing. I'd triple-checked every deliverable. The Q-line models were stable, the diagnostic scripts were clean, and I'd personally trained the junior engineers on the new airflow regulator protocol. There was no wrong to fix, so I assumed it was the other thing, the change. I wore the Navy slacks, the ones I kept pressed just in case. I didn't bring a notebook. I didn't need to. Bianca's office was clinical as always. Shelves perfectly aligned, one citrus candle always half burned, never lower. She gave me a crisp nod and gestured to the chair across from her. I sat. She smiled, polished, and controlled. "Thanks for coming in, Rowena," she said, tapping her tablet. "I want to talk to you about the lead engineer position." I didn't nod, didn't lean forward, just stayed still. "We've made a decision," she continued. "We're going with Darren." There was a pause. Just long enough for me to register it wasn't a joke. "Darren," I repeated. Bianca's voice stayed even. "We believe he aligns more clearly with how we want to present ourselves to executive leadership. He's strategic. He knows how to handle optics." It wasn't the first time I'd heard that word, but this time it made my palms sweat. I didn't ask why my 27-hour code rework didn't count, or why saving the plant from a failed actuator test last quarter wasn't strategic. I didn't ask because I already knew. I folded my hands in my lap, anchored them there. I appreciate the clarity. I said quietly. Bianca looked up surprised by my calm. "Rowena, I'll be submitting my resignation," I said, "effective in 2 weeks." She blinked. "That's sudden." "I've made my decision. You'll help transition him into the role." No, my voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. She hesitated, searching for the right kind of professional disappointment to wear. "You're refusing to support the handoff. I'm choosing to finish my current workload. That's all." I stood before she could find another question, stepped out of her office, and let the door close behind me. At home that evening, in the silence of my garage, I unlatched the steel cabinet behind the tool wall and pulled out the project they never even asked about. The cabinet hissed slightly as I opened it, the seal still tight from the last time I locked it. Behind the rows of labeled bins and rusted socket sets sat the matte gray casing I knew by heart, smooth, compact, unbranded. I ran my fingers across the etched ridges where the ventilation met the processor core. Sentinel didn't need a badge. It just needed to work. For 2 years, I'd poured everything into it. Nights after double shifts, weekends, I should have spent resting hours I could have wasted in meetings, nodding along to flashy slides Darren had slapped his name on. Instead, I built Sentinel line by line, an AI system, smart enough to detect mechanical anomalies before they escalated into hazards. Not thresholds, not red line alerts, actual predictive patterning. Heat flux, vibration, irregularities, pressure curve drift. It had already been deployed in 2 construction zones under pilot labels Test Rig A and Beta Site 3. Quiet approvals. No one from management knew. Just a few project managers willing to test a box that didn't ask for credit. Last week, Site 3 had 0 incidents. The old system averaged 3 minor failures per cycle. This week, their foreman sent me a 2-word text, "Still green." I powered up the console and watched as the interface came to life. The data pulled up clean core temperature stable detection latency at 2.1 seconds, well below margin. Every metric hummed with certainty. I navigated to the local drive, opened my version, control, and ran the backup script. Source lines, compiled, builds, test logs, everything time-stamped. Then I uploaded the latest architecture draft to my provisional patent folder. Submission confirmed. They thought I was just walking away. No title, no closure, no fight. But I hadn't walked away. I had simply stepped into something that was already mine. I unplugged the console and turned off the bench light. Sentinel didn't need anyone to announce it. It just needed to stay running. And it was. The next morning, I arrived at the office exactly on time. No fanfare, no goodbyes, just 2 weeks left and a system humming in my garage. By the time I walked through the doors Monday morning, I already had the list in my head. Every script I'd written, every model I'd tweaked, every data pipeline I'd rebuilt from scratch, while someone else summarized it in a PowerPoint. I wasn't angry, not anymore, just methodical. I sat at my desk, pulled up the encrypted drive, and began moving through the backlog, line by line, model by model. I didn't hide anything. I documented exactly what was mine with submission dates, change logs, annotations. Every critical component had a signature. Not flashy, just irrefutable. Around midday, Darren appeared at the edge of my cubicle, leaning like we were old friends instead of a paper mask over my work. "Hey, Rowena," he grinned. "Bianca said you'd help walk me through the Q-line airflow integrity stuff. Heard your scripts were elegant," I kept typing. "It's all in the notes." "Sure, but maybe a quick run-through. You're good at presenting, right?" I glanced at him once, flat. "Just dig into the files." He shifted, smile, faltering. "Right, of course." He lingered a second longer, waiting for a thaw that wouldn't come, then walked off. The moment he turned, I opened the next folder and resumed backing up the chain of algorithms they never bothered to understand. On Thursday, Bianca called me in again. She tried to smile like nothing had shifted. "We're hoping you can provide some insight for Darren before you leave." I didn't move. "You know, workflows, team dynamics, soft stuff. The kind that doesn't live in documents." "You mean intuition?" I asked. "Gut sense." She nodded. "Yes, exactly. That's not transferable," I said. "It lives in experience, and he doesn't have mine." Bianca blinked. "Well, surely you can give him some guidance." "I could," I said, standing, "but I won't." She opened her mouth, then closed it. I left the room without waiting for permission. Back at my desk, I uploaded the last set of design files to the archive, time-stamped and notarized. I'd drawn the line. They could step over it, but they'd be walking into shadows they didn't know how to read. The following day, I left 30 minutes early. No one stopped me. It had been 2 weeks since I'd turned in my badge and walked out the door. The silence that followed wasn't unfamiliar. It was the same kind that filled the garage during Sentinel's late-night calibrations, the same that wrapped itself around me when recognition never came. I liked it better than noise. The email came late afternoon, buried between a warranty notice and a reminder to replace my water filter. The subject line was Clean Sentinel Inquiry, Astra Tech. I clicked it twice before I really read it. The sender, Callum Drake, Vice President of Industrial Operations at Astra Tech. His message was brief, but unmistakably direct. He'd seen my provisional patent filings, knew about the beta test reports. He wanted to talk off record face to face. We met at a roadside diner outside O'Hare. Vinyl seats, burnt coffee, no pretense. He was already there when I arrived, sipping from a chipped mug and flipping through a black notebook. He stood when I approached. "Rowena," he said, shaking my hand. "I've been looking forward to this." He didn't waste time. He didn't flatter. Within 5 minutes, he laid out what he knew. Sentinel's beta data had surfaced in a mid-state contractor report he'd reviewed last month. He traced the architecture to my filings. He'd done his homework. "I'm not here to buy you out," he said. "I don't believe in swallowing innovation. I believe in building with the person who created it." He slid a folder across the table. Inside a co-founder level contract. I'd retain full intellectual property rights. I'd lead implementation. I'd have a vote on the development board. No fine print, no title games. Just work that mattered on my terms. I didn't respond right away. I read every line, asked every question I needed to. Callum didn't flinch. He clarified where needed, adjusted where it made sense. When I finally closed the folder, I nodded once. "Yes," I said. Not because I needed to be rescued, but because I knew what I'd built. And now, finally, someone else did too. By the time I left the diner, I'd already begun planning the integration framework. The first message came from Tyler, one of the junior engineers I used to mentor. Q-lines overheating again. Diagnostics flagged, but no one knows why. I read it, then locked my phone without replying. 3 days later, another pinged through. Ethan asked me to walk him through the backup routines, then told me he didn't have time. "Just thought you should know." I didn't answer that one either. I just archived it under a folder labeled Post-Kelridge. They didn't know what they were sitting on until it was gone. That wasn't bitterness. It was observation. When you build something to hold weight and then you step away, the cracks expose themselves without any help from you. At Astra, Sentinel was already running in its first full deployment at the Tulsa facility. 30 days in, and the numbers were cleaner than I dared to hope. Downtime 0. Preemptive fault flags accurate to 98%. Heat variance detection functioning without delay. The plant manager joked once in an email, "We're calling it the Oracle." "Hope you don't mind." I didn't mind. I smiled. It wasn't just the name. It was the way the system was being used, taken seriously, adjusted, with intention, not patched over with buzzwords. Field engineers were sending me feedback not filtered through layers of middle management, but directly, openly. Meanwhile, back at my old lab, the symptoms were piling up. Reports surfaced on internal boards, then quietly leaked to niche forums. Threads started appearing with titles like Kelridge Q5 malfunctions and thermal overshoot at mid-state plant. I knew every line of that code. I had authored it, tested it, stabilized it. I had handed them a system that held together because I held it together. Now it was slipping because the scaffolding they ignored was gone. I didn't gloat. I didn't post. I didn't say a word. But I read everything. I watched from a distance as the system bent under its own assumptions. And while they tried to pinpoint what had changed, I opened a clean draft labeled Sentinel 2.0. The email came just after 11, the timestamp flickering next to a quiet inbox. I almost missed it, buried between rollout notes and diagnostics charts from Tulsa. The subject line was simple, from Bianca Ruiz. I stared at it for a long moment before opening it. Rowena. I've thought about writing this more times than I can count. I should have reached out sooner, but I wasn't sure what to say. Things at Kelridge have shifted. Ethan was let go last week. His updates didn't hold. His redesigns unraveled. The systems we thought were stable weren't. I take full responsibility for that promotion. I thought I was choosing someone who could lead the future of the lab. What I failed to see, what I deeply regret, is that the future had already been there. It was you. If there's ever a chance to reconnect, I'd welcome it. But even if not, I wanted to say this to you directly. I was wrong, and I'm stepping down. It's time, Bianca. I read it twice slowly, like it might change the second time. It didn't. Then I typed a reply. Bianca, thank you for your note. I wish you well in your next chapter. Rowena. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel angry either. Mostly I felt still. Her words weren't a repair. They weren't meant to be. She wasn't reaching for redemption, just a measure of clarity that had come too late. I printed the email and pinned it to the board in my office right next to two things. The first schematic I ever drew of Sentinel and a yellow sticky note from that meeting in her office, not aligned with company vision. I looked at them side by side, a rejection and a recognition, neither of them defining me anymore. The vision was mine now, fully mine, and it was moving. That same night, I finalized the rollout specs for our second plant site. Sentinel would go live in Missouri next. The Missouri deployment went live ahead of schedule. Within 3 weeks, downtime dropped by 17%. By the end of the second month, it was 22. The numbers didn't spike, they sank clean and steady. Fewer incidents, faster recoveries, tighter operations. No one made a big announcement, they just started building schedules around it. Run it the Oracle way. I heard one manager say during a shift meeting I was quietly observing. I didn't correct them. The name had stuck. By the time Sentinel expanded into the third plant, Astra's leadership team began floating the idea of internal clinics, technical walkthroughs, knowledge sharing sessions. They asked if I would lead the first one. I said yes, on one condition: no stage, no slide deck, no scripts. The first session was meant to be small. 15 seats in a conference room with a whiteboard and a marker I brought myself. By the time I started, 30 engineers had shown up. They pulled in chairs from the hallway. A few sat on the floor. I walked them through what Sentinel actually did, how it tracked thermal drift not as a number, but as a story, how it adapted to pattern changes, how it learned to anticipate failure by reading the language of machines before they collapsed. No drama, just function. When I finished, a young staffer from logistics lingered behind. He looked maybe 25, still had the new hire lanyard. You made me want to build again, he said. Not just hit targets. Actually build. I nodded once. I didn't need to say anything else. After that, the sessions became weekly. They weren't mandatory, but the rooms were always full. Procurement staff started sitting in. Shift leads asked to join remotely from the plants. Someone taped a paper sign outside the door that read, Oracle Clinic All Welcome. I never advertised them, but people kept coming. What started as a technical review had turned into something else, an ethos, a way of working, quiet, rigorous, real. I updated the Sentinel dashboard that Friday. All systems were green. A new message from corporate waited in my inbox. The message requests started small. A few pings from engineers at smaller facilities in the Midwest asking if I'd be willing to review a logic chain or glance over a sensor integration plan. Then someone from a chemical plant in Utah sent a link to their internal diagnostics dashboard with a note. We're trying to rework this using your model. Any chance for feedback? I didn't remember giving out my contact info, but somehow they'd found me. My LinkedIn started flashing with new connections every day. No influencers, no recruiters, just engineers. Floor leads, operators. People with real dirt under their fingernails looking for clean answers. Then the video made its way around. It had started as a short clip I'd filmed on a Tuesday afternoon just before a training session. No lights, no editing. Just me, a whiteboard, and a sentence I needed to say out loud. If you build in silence while someone else takes credit, keep building. Your work will outlive the noise. I posted it to our internal forum at Astra. Someone copied it to an industry Slack group. From there, it spread without a name or brand attached, just the words. I received a message from a woman in Indiana working in steel fabrication. You don't know me, but your voice helped me believe quiet work still matters. I didn't respond right away. I just read it twice, then printed it and pinned it to the wall next to my old prototype schematic. I hadn't asked for any of this. Not the attention, not the title, not the movement forming quietly under my name, but it was happening. And it wasn't about me. It was about what we built, what we kept building when the noise tried to drown it out. Later that week, I was asked to review the new Sentinel update logs for the Arizona site. They'd already begun referring to the protocol as a standard. And that Friday, Royce stopped by my office with a document in hand and a grin that told me something was about to shift again. Royce handed me the folder without ceremony, a standard HR envelope with my new title already printed on the final page, Chief Innovation Strategist. I read it once, signed where required, and handed it back. Then I walked to my office, peeled the old laminated tag off the door, and slid the new one into place. The font was the same, so was the corner. The change wasn't in the label, it was in the weight of being allowed to keep building on my own terms. That week, I led sessions with engineers from 5 different sites: Tulsa, Phoenix, St. Louis, Baton Rouge, Lexington. Some of them had driven 10 hours to attend in person. They didn't come for inspiration, they came for answers. I gave them what I had: pattern libraries, sensor decay timelines, failure correlation matrices. I didn't hold anything back. I didn't dress it up. And when someone asked a question, I wrote the math out by hand. I sat on 3 technical panels that quarter, not because I asked to be invited, but because people kept saying yes to the way I explained things. I didn't talk about legacy or vision, just process, just precision, just the logic that kept people from getting hurt. One afternoon after a quanda, a young guy in a faded denim shirt waited until the others had cleared out. I recognized the patch on his sleeve, Kentucky plant newest facility. Before this system, he said quietly, nobody gave a damn. We patched and hoped. Now I stay because of what you built. I thanked him, but the truth sat somewhere deeper. I hadn't built it for recognition. I'd built it so fewer people had to hope duct tape would hold. That evening, I stayed late updating Sentinel's documentation for the new rollout phase. By the time I closed my laptop, the building was empty, except for the night custodian humming softly in the hallway. The next morning, I found a message in my inbox from an engineering professor at the University of Illinois. She wanted to talk about curriculum. The light hit the wall at the usual angle that morning, just enough to draw my eye to the 2 papers tacked above the desk. I looked at them the way you might glance at old photographs, familiar but still sharp in the chest. On the left, a yellow sticky note fading, now the ink slightly smudged. Bianca's words scribbled fast during that meeting months ago, not aligned with company vision. On the right, a printed message from an engineer I'd never met in person. You made this work feel like it matters again. They sat side by side, rejection and purpose. I didn't have to choose which one to believe anymore. One was a misunderstanding. The other was the result. I didn't frame them. I didn't need to. Just 2 reminders taped to the drywall with the same kind of focus that had built everything else. That week, I finalized the export packages for Sentinel's next integration cycle. Arizona and Kentucky were already stable with 2 more sites prepped for deployment. And then came the email from the University of Illinois, followed by another from Cal Poly. Both wanted permission to include Sentinel's architecture in their engineering curriculum, not because I pitched it, not because I made a speech, but because the data had traveled on its own. I signed the release forms, attached the supporting documentation, and sent them off without ceremony. It wasn't about legacy. It was about systems that worked. The following morning, I arrived early to set up for the next internal clinic. 3 new faces waited by the door, procurement logistics, and a field tech from a subcontractor we hadn't even onboarded yet. They weren't required to be there, but they were. I turned on the whiteboard, uncapped a marker, and started writing the title of the session, Failure Prediction, via Multi-Sensor Drift Analysis. Before I could finish the first line, someone tapped the door frame gently. I looked up to see Royce standing there, tablet in hand, a familiar grin pulling at the corners of his mouth.